B, C, D, F, G, H, I, J, K.
My name is Stephen Ferlauto. My education was in graphic design, and my career has been as an art director. My passion over the past 40 years has been the study of the divine in geometry and the Roman alphabet. In this last lecture on the series about the Roman alphabet, I will read a short story for the precocious child in all of us. The story plays with the energy of the 1-2 root 5 triangle. We don't examine the alphabet in the story. We simply use the alphabet for its purpose, to tell our story. I premise the piece with a beautiful quote from one of our greatest geniuses, Johannes Kepler. We do not ask for what purpose the birds do sing, for song is their pleasure, since they were created for singing. Similarly, we ought not ask why the human mind troubles to fathom the secrets of the heavens. Johannes Kepler. Pico Mirandola states in his On the Dignity of Man, as was the practice of ancient theologians, Orpheus covered the mysteries of his doctrines with the wrappings of fables and disguised them with a poetic garment, so that whoever reads his hymns may believe there is nothing underneath but tales and purest nonsense. In reference to Pico's lesson on fables, I've disguised my reflections in the following story. A Little Fib, a Fibonacci Fable, a Geometric Look at the Matter of Things, by Stephen Ferlauto. Where there is matter, there is geometry. Johannes Kepler. Once there was a square who was all alone. She would sit quietly and reflect upon herself as in a hall of mirrors. One day, Square felt an edgy sensation along one of her sides, something perhaps from another page or dimension. Square felt this unusual sensation was triggered by a strange shadow hanging about her. This is her shadow. It seemed that when Square sided up to this shadow, a synergistic relationship formed. A diagonal appeared, bonding the square and its shadow together. She knew this shadow to be her second self. Square became completely versed in her second selves. She learned that she existed on many different pages of this book and beyond. She also existed in many different sizes. Taking full advantage of her potential, her two squares sided up to her larger self. Her two squares sided up to her larger self. Their total measure now became 3. 1 square and 1 square equals 2 squares. 2 squares plus 1 equals 3. Whirling through space, using this additive concept, 2 became 3, 2 became 3, 2 plus 1, 3 became 5, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 became 8, 3 plus 5 is 8. Square added more and more to her form. Her imagination began to spiral. An understanding of the layers of time and space coalesced. Repeating herself, Square birthed a string of events that simulate the Fibonacci series. The Fibonacci series is a simple additive sequence that grows in its attempt to attain the proportion known as the golden ratio. The Fibonacci series 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. Consecutive numbers are added together to progress the series. So 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, and so on, into infinity. In the Fibonacci series, consecutive numbers create fractions that estimate the proportion of the golden ratio. For example, 55/89 is a fraction from the series. So you can see how the series is moving along and we come up to two numbers, 55 and 89. As the Fibonacci series progresses, its fractions become increasingly closer to the golden ratio. However, it can never completely describe it because the golden ratio is an irrational number. So what is the golden ratio? The golden ratio. The lesser is to the greater as the greater is to the whole. Segment AB is to BC as BC is to AC, or the lesser is to the greater as the greater is to the whole. Note how the fraction 55/89 from the Fibonacci series is represented in the diagram as it estimates the proportion of the golden ratio. So 55, segment 55, let's say that's 55 inches, and let's say this is 89 inches. The total of 55 and 89 is 144, so the total would be 144 inches. So 55 is to 89, as 89 is to 144. The famous mathematician, Johannes Kepler, lauded this proportion, comparing it to a precious jewel. The Fibonacci series has a peculiar irregularity in its pattern. As in our story, the 1, square, repeats herself. This is the only time in the Fibonacci series that a number repeats itself. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. So the 1 repeats itself, 1 and 1. And as in the story, square and her shadow. Square takes full advantage of this duplication. She uses a simple binary system of 1 and 0 plus 1, the square and its shadow, to create endless energy manifesting in an infinite spiral. And here we go. This is her spiral. Strikingly, Square was a masterful artist. Her quirky personality and love of order created marvelous mandalas, yet in all her galactic glory, she yearned for the simple. So she sat and meditated. You see, that's Square's mouth, meditating. Square knew that the whirling complexity of her life was getting her closer to the truth. However, this path of greater and greater fractions could never answer the irrationality of infinity. So Square concentrated on that first synergistic connection and the divine trinity formed from her binding diagonal. So this is Square, her shadow, and her binding diagonal. So this is unit 1, this is 2, and that's root 5. The Pythagorean theorem, what is it? A squared plus b squared equals c squared, or 1 squared plus 2 squared equals 5 squared, or c equals root 5. Using the Pythagorean theorem, Square calculated her diagonal to be root 5. Her other two lengths were 1 and 2. Looking inward, examining her root, Square and her shadow divided her base into the golden ratio. Square subtracted her side 1, from her diagonal, root 5. So we put our compass center here, opened up unit 1, and rotated the compass to intersect the root 5. And then divided root 5 minus 1 into her base. So this intersection is root 5 minus 1, and we swung it to divide it into her base, which is 2. Root 5 minus 1 over 2 equals 0.61803398887. It goes on. It's irrational. That fraction that decimal will never end. And that equals the golden ratio. This calculation led Square to an irrational idea. She realized that she held a never-ending genomic expansion of her baseline. The golden ratio was infinitely repeated within her double square. Square's existence materialized in the irrational expression of the golden ratio. The golden ratio is duly recognized as the blueprint of nature. Examples abound, from the spiral of a pine cone and the beauty of a nautilus shell to the helix of our very DNA. Thinking outside the box, Square considered all she had learned. By infinitely multiplying and dividing her golden ratio, she grew in many ways. Square became self-aware. She was someone. She mattered. And you too are all that matter. After poem. There once was a square who sat in despair 'cause nothing else existed. But then she felt something as her points started bumping and she let out a song of delight. Well, that really did it. The square really hit it. From a little vibration came light. And that's the story. We have an afternote here talking about the square. The Masonic square represents the material world. The square represents matter. That's J.S. Ward, Interpretation of Our Masonic Symbols. In the Eastern religions of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism, the square represents the physical plane, the earth. It also signifies the physical body of man. Plato describes the square in the diagonal as a physical model of our existential existence. That's in the Republic. We must say there are as many squares as there are numbers. That's Galileo Galilei. I'm playing with him a bit. Of course, he's talking about square roots, and I'm making it literal. Thank you so much for listening to my lectures. I really appreciate it. Please go to my website, archetypegeometry.com, and leave me a comment if you enjoyed the series or have any questions. Thank you. Be well.